Becky Lydon, I'm founder of Sensory Spectacle. This video is part of a series where I'm answering your questions about sensory processing difficulties. I've been given questions from parents and professionals, and it's all to help create a better understanding and awareness of sensory processing difficulties. Share the videos with your friends and families and colleagues, but also subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you don't miss any. So in this video I'm just going to explain some of the reasons why we might recognise characteristics and behaviours changing really easily or really quickly. Now I know for a lot of parents they may already be really aware of the things that their child may find difficult or the things that their child may really enjoy. So we may well know that our child supports themselves throughout the day at school really well, and so education can see that they are learning or coping and managing throughout their everyday in school. However, when your child comes home, they may well then just release everything and let go and may well respond in a difficult way. They may find things really overwhelming. They may well seek lots and lots of sensory input, or they might need something in order to be able to calm themselves down. Now, this is a response that we recognise a lot for children with sensory processing difficulties, and the reason for that is because when they're at school, when they're in their classroom, when they're learning, when they have structure, or just throughout their everyday routine with their friends and with their peers, they are able to seem like they are managing. They will be doing something in order to regulate themselves. So it may well be something as simple as where they're sitting in the classroom. It may well be that they will always be at the front of the queue. It may well be that they love reading books and so they take themselves off to read a book every now and then. However, when they come home, when they're in that safe environment, when they know that they can be them, they are tired, they are exhausted, and they want to just be able to be them. And so that means all of this information that they've been regulating throughout their day at school is released, and so we may well notice lots of climbing, lots of jumping needed, lots of sensory input, or a withdrawal. We might well recognise characteristics relating to anyone who's tired, so getting upset easily, wanting to eat certain kinds of food, wanting to play with certain kinds of toys. And then we may well notice when we recognise someone who is really trying to get in that extra sensory input or finding everything incredibly overwhelming, we may well then notice where someone may well respond physically. So they may well push things out of the way because they just want to be by themselves. And so then we see someone who might become frustrated and generally just overwhelmed with everything that's happening around them. Now, the reason why we may see behaviours that seem to change really easily can relate to thresholds. Now, threshold is the amount of sensory input that someone recognises. So we may well notice in some settings that some people, so children as well as adults, may well be constantly seeking. So they may well be flickering something in their hands and looking at it, or they may well be constantly listening to music, or they may well be constantly needing to move. Now, that's because they need so much sensory input in order to be able to recognise it. Whereas other people may well just need a smaller amount of sensory input before their body recognises it. So some people may well be able to go for a walk out of the classroom for a minute and then come back in, and that's enough for them to then be able to refocus. Whereas other students may well need lots of physical input, so they may need a run around the playground a few times, maybe a good 5 or 10 minutes doing physical exercise before they're then ready to come back into the classroom. Now that's two examples of someone who seeks out that physical input but has a different amount of threshold, so a different amount of information that they need. So someone who has a really high threshold will be that student that needs the 5 minutes running around the playground, whereas the student with a lower threshold is someone who's seeking out that sensory input, maybe for a minute just walking around and being able to come back and being able to focus. Now that can happen with all of our senses. So for any sensory system that someone finds difficult to process and to organise, it means that we're going to recognise these characteristics fluctuate. So if someone has a really low threshold to sound, for example, they may well seek sound, but then they may very quickly want to avoid sound, and then they may seek sound, because the amount of sound that they seek is a really tiny amount. So if they go into an environment with loads of sound, it can very quickly become too much for them because they've just reached that point where it's too overwhelming. They then need to avoid that input. So then we recognise someone who then avoids it. And then avoiding it, they only need to avoid a small amount before they seek again. Now this change in seeking and avoiding characteristics is also where we recognise those quick or easy changes in behaviour as well. So if we think back to being at school, everything seems regulated in school, and then when someone comes home, you've got lots of changes in the environment, and it's somewhere where someone feels safe. But also, it's the fact that those thresholds are trying to organise themselves back out again. And if you've been on one of my workshops, you know why I'm doing this, because I visualise it with a horizontal line. If we can recognise how we tell ourselves throughout our everyday lives that we're regulated, that we're feeling okay, when we're recognising characteristics of someone seeking out sensations or avoiding sensations, we'll then be able to understand and recognise why we may see these changes really quickly. Now, therefore, one of the reasons why we know a characteristic relating to sensory processing disorder is a need to be in control is because if someone has a low threshold and their sensory input fluctuates really quickly or really easily, then it means if I'm in control, I'm going to be more able to respond to that in a way which I'm aware of. If something's spontaneous, like for all of us, it catches us when we're unaware, and then we respond in a startled way, we'll have a reflexive response to that. And so for someone with sensory processing disorder, that reflexive response may well be too much. And so we know that when they are in control, they're more able to feel okay and regulate themselves. So when someone comes home and is becoming overwhelmed with everything, yes, they're in control of it, but they're also just trying to regulate themselves through everything that's happened throughout that day. And for a lot of young children in education, it can be relating to the information overload, to everything that they've learnt that day, and they may have had a really fantastic day, but in order for them to be able to focus on their favourite topic for that day, so say they've been doing a theme of Vikings or Romans and they love history, they're going to really want to engage in that, which means that they've been spending a lot of their day just trying to focus on that work and regulate themselves without needing to obviously leave the room or regulate themselves with their other students and other peers. So we must remember that need to be in control is really important. We can support someone to feel like they're in control. So by having things available at home or at school in order for them to be able to give themselves or avoid that sensory input if they need it in order to be able to regulate.